Hello, 11th graders. I hope you guys have made the most of these last few days of Ramadan. In this week's lesson, I'll be taking you through how to do a close reading of a literary text. If we think about it, Ramadan is in part about close reading and reflection. You've taken this month to fast and reflect on your relationship with Allah, your family, and your society. Especially now with everything going on in the world, there's been even more reflection on the meaning of the messages received through the Holy Quran, through a close reading. And this is where I leave you, with the understanding that your close reading will bring you even closer to better understanding and reflection, whether religious or academic texts. Okay, let's get into it. I'll start by telling you how to proceed through this lesson. As usual, I'll begin the lesson proper by giving you guys a do now. Next, I'll give you my take on what close readings are and why we do them. After that, I'll go into teacher mode and describe a 6-step process that I think is absolutely essential for you to go through when you do close readings of any text, but especially literary ones. Following this, I'll show you a short excerpt from Shooting an Elephant, a short essay by George Orwell that I admire, and highlight some features of the excerpt that I think should stand out to you if you do a close reading of the excerpt. Finally, I'll end this lesson by asking you a few questions about the short excerpt that should help you understand why I pointed you to the aspects of the excerpt that I'll highlight. Alright, here's the do now. The do now is pretty straightforward. I want you all to pause the video and take a minute or two to think about what a close reading is and why we close read at all. Try to do this and think about back to what your teachers have told you about close readings. And if you can't recall what you learned in class about close readings, feel free to guess what it is or do a quick Google search. Since I'll tell you what a close reading is anyway, guessing or Googling is not too dangerous. Whatever means you choose to complete this do now, make sure to write your answer down so you have something to compare my views on what the definition and purpose of close readings are. Now, pause the video and get to it. Alright, how did you answer the do now? Did you write down your answer? If you did, good for you. You're engaging in this lesson with the seriousness it deserves, and your efforts will be rewarded through improved knowledge about close readings. Those of you who are good at attentive listening, a skill somewhat related to close reading, might already have an idea of what I'll say about the definition and purpose of close readings, as I touched on it in my introductory remarks to this lesson. A close reading is a thorough reflection on or analysis of the meaning of a particular text and its purpose through reflection to come to an understanding of a meaning of that text. Now for some of you, what I have just said may seem simple. I'm sure, though, that a good number of you find my definition and claim about the purpose of close readings quite complex. If you're in the second group, I think you're right. It is complex. Why is it complex? Well, here are 2 questions that I think help clarify the complexity. What does the understanding the meaning of a text entail? And how do you communicate your understanding of a text meaning? An easier answer to both questions might be that the understanding and communicating the meaning of a text amounts to being able to explain to others, say, in a summary, what a text says. I think this is partly true. Partly true because what a text says, especially a literary one, is sometimes different from what the text means. For example, an author might say something in an ironic or paradoxical way, and so the actual meaning intended by the author might be the exact opposite of what the text, at least on the surface, says. Of course, this doesn't mean you should only do close readings when what a text says might be the opposite of what it actually means, because even when texts aren't ironic or paradoxical, in what way they say their meaning isn't necessarily obvious. In what way they say their meaning isn't necessarily obvious. While I stand by what I just said about close reading being distinct from a summary, I don't want to give you the impression that the two are completely unrelated. In order to successfully read a text closely, you must be able to summarize it well. Think back to our first lesson on Google Classroom, where we learned what a good summary was, and that it achieves 3 things. It tells us What are the main ideas of a text or passage? What are the crucial details in the text that are necessary for supporting these ideas? And both of these are based on the evidence from the text, not our own opinions. A good close reading will also meet these criteria, but go beyond them by informing us about why and how the main ideas of the passage lead us to understanding or contribute to the meaning of a text as a whole. What style does the author use to communicate the meaning in the text, and is the author's chosen style effectively helping convey to us the meaning he or she intends? And lastly, how does the author's word choice indicate the meaning of his or her text? Why does the author choose particular words, and are the author's word choices effective in leading readers to his or her text meaning? Good answers to all these questions will of course need to be supported with textual evidence. A good way to think about how to support your answers to these questions is to recall what you learned about selecting evidence to support a thesis. This is because answering these questions in a close reading of text should ideally result in you formulating a thesis about what the meaning of the text is, and, as you know, a thesis is only as good as the evidence that supports it. Whew, that was a lot. Still, I believe going through it all was unavoidable. Close reading a text requires paying laser-like attention to a text's meaning, and meaning is nuanced, so it makes sense that what a close reading is and is for would be nuanced as well. Fortunately, though, the steps that one needs to take when doing a close reading are straightforward. There are only 6 of them, and they are 1. Read with a pencil or pen in hand and annotate the text as you read. 2. Look for patterns in the things you've noticed about the text, repetition, contradiction, similarities. 3. Ask questions about the patterns you've noticed, especially how and why questions. 4. Answer the questions you've asked in step 3. 5. Read the passage again, at least twice more. 6. Check if you think the questions you asked and their answers make sense. If they do make sense, write down as briefly as you can what you think the meaning of the text is, and outline why you think you are right. If they don't make sense, go through all these steps again. Do this until doing so makes you want to never do a close reading again. That's all I'm going to tell you about close readings today. And frankly, I'm sure you've had enough and want to apply all this by sinking your teeth into a text and reading it closely. And here's your chance. For this week's practice, you will be reading Shooting an Elephant. Shooting an Elephant is a short 6-page essay by George Orwell in which he reflects on the evils of imperialism, colonialism, and in particular on the negative effects of imperialism has on the imperialists. While you read the essay in its entirety, you will do a close reading of the excerpt that you are looking at on this slide. As you do your close reading, I want you to take note of sentences I have highlighted in red. Do this because paying attention to those highlighted sentences and what they mean and how they contribute to the meaning of the excerpt as a whole will aid your effort to read the excerpt closely. Don't worry, the excerpt is bolded in the essay handout, and all that is highlighted in red here is highlighted in the handout too. After reading the whole essay, write a short summary. Then, do a close reading of the excerpt you saw on the previous slide and make sure to follow the 6-step process I told you about. Lastly, to help us give you feedback on how well you've done on close reading the passage, please answer these 4 questions in 2 to 3 sentences. Your answers to these questions are due next Friday, May 29th. And that's it for this week's lesson. One last thing. Since I've suggested to you that close reading requires that you should be able to summarize a text, as well as identify and utilize textual evidence to support your thesis about what a text means, it's probably a good idea to re-watch the videos of these lessons as well, and review the feedback you received for the exercises you completed for each lesson. See you next week.